It seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts. It's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos pregame walkthrough brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. Huge week this week as the Argos head to BC. Here's the stories we got for you on this episode. Ricky Ray and Dick Thornton are both being entered into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Earnest Edwards was released. We've got OCDC coming for you as we set up this huge matchup with the BC Lions. We, of course, will also have one thing, our predictions for this week, fantasy advice, and our picks for all the games in the CFL. All that more coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Ricky Ray and Dick Thornton going to the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. These are basically no-brainers for us. We've talked about Dick Thornton before on our all-time Argos episode, and everybody in the CFL, anyone who's a CFL fan, would have said, yeah, Ricky Ray, first ballot Hall of Fame, and there he is, first ballot.
Yeah, it's nice for Ricky Ray. He's had, such a prolific career with Edmonton and Toronto. It's kind of weird because he was probably better in Edmonton than he was in Toronto, but Toronto considers him the best Argo quarterback of all time. But clearly his stats are amazing. And, so he's certainly you look at his career in totality, he's certainly well deserving of the Hall of Fame. I could sit and debate whether he's the best Argos quarterback of all time or not, but I wouldn't debate his Hall of Fame credentials.
We have sat and debated that, I think, because it's really tough. Like with the Argos, because we need to know what the criteria is. Because Doug Flutie, I think, would probably be the answer, except that it was a couple seasons. Does that skew anything? Ricky Ray here for 7 years, and it is weird that both of those guys, while you would say have to be up there, both of them are definitely in the top 4 for sure. I think a lot of people just have them top 2, but they were arguably better with other teams. It is weird, but you can't deny that he would have, even if he just played for Toronto, I think he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, and if he had just played for Edmonton, he's a Hall of Fame quarterback. So it's it's a really easy decision to send him into the Hall of Fame. But yeah, it is weird that I remember when TSN was doing the all-time teams, and they had Doug Flutie as the quarterback for both. Well, they have Doug Flutie for the quarterback for both Toronto and Calgary. Yeah, and you could have done the same with Ricky Ray for Edmonton and Toronto. So, whatever, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm glad that we certainly think of him as an Argonaut, but I certainly wouldn't blame anyone for thinking of him with his Edmonton ties, because he spent more time there. His stats were better there, but I think it was just more the number of games, because he played so much more in Edmonton. Dick Thornton's kind of a fun one. We talked about him on our all-time Argos list because he's such a unique stats perspective for I'm gonna say modern. He played in the 60s, so it's not that modern, but by Argos standards, you can go back a long ways. So in the history of the Argonauts, he's sort of modern, but he was so multi-positioned. He was best known as a defensive back. He was a very good defensive back. I think he had the most points scored as a defensive player, and he held that record for like 40 years or something like that. Pick sixes, fumble return touchdowns. But he also played quarterback. He was a punter, a running back, a wide receiver. This is in the days of Ironman football, but they were sort of phasing that out. So it was right at the end of it. And to be able to play all of those positions professionally and to score touchdowns in 5 different ways, I think is pretty amazing. So yeah, another guy that deserves to be there. He also played with the Blue Bombers, but I'm going to think of him as an Argonaut.
Yeah, and it brings up an interesting conversation for another day about, are there any current Argonauts on this path?
Yeah, and there are a couple, and guys that probably don't get thought of as Argonauts when they go into the Hall of Fame. Like Enoch Mwamba is going to be a Hall of Famer. I don't think if he went in after, if this was his last year playing, I don't think people think of him as an Argonaut, but I think we would. But yeah, there's maybe a couple guys. Andrew Harris, obviously, is not going to be thought of as an Argonaut when he goes into the Hall of Fame. Brandon Banks isn't going to be thought of as an Argonaut when he goes into the Hall of Fame. I don't know. This roster, remember, like all of these guys, there was, I guess, 2 of these guys were on the Argonauts in 2019. So it's not like there's anyone on this roster that you're thinking as a Hall of Fame candidate at this point and thinking of them as an Argo. So the team is in kind of a unique position because they completely cleared house. Yeah, and you don't.
It's an interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of lens to view the roster development through.
And I can't even, like, I'm trying to think right now of like some of the young guys, like the first or second year players. I think like you'd have to say, like who's closest to being a Hall of Famer from the rookies? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think
Curly Gibbs Jr.
I know, but like he's got a long way to go.
Yes. And he has at least 5 more teams to play for.
Yeah, at least. Yeah. But so I don't know. Maybe
that's who I'm pulling for.
Earnest Edwards was released today. This came as a bit of a surprise to me, but when I started looking at the other receivers on this roster, I kind of get why. Earnest Edwards, the reason I hate to lose him is that I don't know what this coaching staff's aversion to speed is. I love speed receivers, even if they can't do everything. Just having them there to stretch out the defense, I think, is a value. Earnest Edwards is a really fast guy. They've now cut basically all the receivers that are known for their speed, and they sort of did that last year too. And the only holdover was Chandler Worthy, and then he didn't make it, and now Earnest Edwards is gone. I guess their thinking is that Earnest Edwards pretty much needs to be an outside guy, so he needs to be X or Z. He's not going to be Z because that's Curly Gittens Jr. And he's not going to back up Curly Gittens Jr. because that's a Canadian spot. Future Hall of Famer Curly Gittens Jr. And so he's not going to back up that spot. So really it's just Earnest Edwards and X. And they clearly realized, like last week would have been the perfect week to say, okay, this is you making the roster at X because Eric Rogers is down and we're moving our X receiver over to W. So that frees up a spot. And he obviously didn't win the job because they had to move Brandon Banks to X. Brandon Banks, who doesn't like playing X, who's never really played X before, they moved him and put him, future Hall of Famer Brandon Banks, in a position that he wasn't comfortable in because no one else won that job. And so to me, that was it. They're like, well, if he's not going to step up when our X receiver is down, then what are we doing here? So
yeah, for sure. Like from a coaching point of view, if you're on the depth chart and you're down the depth chart and then you're called upon and you can't do it, then you're like, okay, you've got to go. We got to churn the bottom of this roster. And look, I said last year too, I'm all for it. The bottom 4 people on the roster, I'm all for churning constantly until you catch some lightning.
The injury report this week is bananas. You've got 19 Argos listed on the injury report, not including the Argonauts who are on the 6-game injury list. So you're not including your Eric Rogers, your Peter Nicastro, your Jawan Breskison. This is you're basically half the team is on the injured list, and there's some really big concerns. Now, some of it, I'm not sure what to do with. Like Declan Cross and Devaris Daniels have both appeared on the injury list. They didn't practice either today or yesterday. There's not a reason listed other than it's non-injury related. So I don't know what's going on with those 2 guys, but I'm worried about DB. I think there's a real problem here. So we knew it was an issue last game. They were already thin because you've got the Chris Edwards suspension. So remember, we had Robert Priester playing Sam, and then we had Jamal Peters out last week, and he ended up getting replaced by Robertson Daniel, who was going to be the Sam, we think. And then Priester ended up stepping in. So you've already got 2 guys in there that weren't really supposed to be starters in this roster. So going into last week's game, that was the situation. Then Robertson Daniel goes down. He didn't practice yet this week at all. I don't think Robertson Daniel is going to play this week. That would be my guess. And Robert Priester has also shown up on the injury report. He didn't practice yesterday or today, dealing with a hamstring issue. Now we're getting pretty serious. Deshaun Amos, we can add to that, who was limited with a hip injury. And Jamal Peters did end up practicing today. He went full, but this is the first time he's been able to test out that knee. He didn't really get up to much earlier in the week. So, we'll see what that looks like. But if Jamal Peters has any kind of setback after, really trying it out today, they're in trouble, because I think now you're suddenly looking at Caleb Holden starting at corner, and then I don't even know who's backing up. Matt Boateng didn't practice today or yesterday, dealing with a hamstring injury. Everyone in the world has a hamstring injury right now if you play for the Toronto Argonauts. So yeah, defensive back wise, they might be in a situation where they need to bring up Sutton. They might be in a situation where they need to have Haggerty play one of the halfback positions and send Shaq over to play corner. And if somebody gets hurt in this BC game, then I don't know where you're moving guys around to. I'm really curious to see what this depth chart looks like come Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much the on and off, stop start kind of pseudo camp affected the normal ramp up to play, because this is a lot of injuries for a team that's only played one game. I know, some years are just bad luck in terms of injuries, but I do wonder if not having a normal ramp up resulted in more soft tissue injuries. Because this is, I mean, as much disrespect as I piled on BC in the preseason, I mean, they, lay a beating on Edmonton. They're at home. They're going to be a challenge. I mean, we'll get into OCDC, but I don't think necessarily you want to have a cheddar cheese secondary heading into a team that put up 59.
No,
that's
not good.
But that's all. It's all part of it. Hope there's still enough talent there. I think in the secondary to hold the line, but you're right. I mean, no, absolutely nobody else can go down.
Yeah, it's thin right now. And the thing that's so frustrating is that last year the Argos went through this, and I get what you're saying with the camp, being on and off again, and there's so many hamstring injuries. You have to think that came into play, because like last week's injury report had 13 guys on it, and they hadn't even played a game yet. And so, it was already off to a bad start. BC's basically, they're missing like 2 guys this week. So that could be a reason why. But last year, it was such an issue that's what led to the Nick Arbuckle trade. They just got in so tight against the cap, because when you've got guys missing single games, those salaries still count towards your salary cap. 6 games different, because you can take those off the books, but you still, not really, because you still need to bring in a replacement. You still need to sign somebody who knows you need to sign somebody. And so, and if they're Canadians, what the price point's going to be. So
it was one of the things that led to the Nick Arbuckle trade.
Yeah. Obviously, they would have found a different answer had he been lighting it up. But the plan was not to trade him, but they ended up in a real situation. I think that's why both Darby and Arbuckle ended up having to leave, because the money was just too tight.
Well, and look, this is a team that should be able to rely on its offense. I think that basically you're looking at this and you're saying to the we're going to need, you're going to need to put up 35. This is not going to be a game we're going to win 17-14. So, really, I'm looking for the offense to pick up the defense here.
Yeah, and offensively, I'm not too worried. Like, I guess Andrew Harris, and that's obviously a big worry, because he was probably the best offensive player for the Argos last week. And I don't think there's much doubt about that. I think we both had him as the best offensive player. His hamstring, he practiced in limited fashion today. I would imagine he's going to go. But the concern here is that if you're going to, and I don't even know if I would, like, you kind of got to make a call on Harris. This is tough. Like, hamstring injuries, we know they don't get better with playing. It's not like he's going to go out and play against BC and feel pretty good Monday. It doesn't work like that. And so you have to wonder if it's smart to go a different direction this week, to dress Ouellet instead. Leave Harris out, mix around your roster for a bit. Obviously, you're going to have to make that an American spot.
Yeah, and I believe this game is actually sort of surprisingly important, because it could potentially be a dagger game when you look at Hamilton and Montreal potentially going 0-3 this weekend. But on the flip side, you do have a little breathing room, right? Like you do have some breathing room in terms of the division. So if you're going to punt on a game, and they would never say that, but if essentially you're going to punt on a game and just basically rule out everybody who's even tweaked, doing it in the middle of the night in British Columbia is the time to do it.
I guess so, except that it's such a gauntlet after this. Like, this is a big game.
That's what I mean. So, like, maybe it makes way more sense to punt on this. Because, I mean, you could easily see Montreal and Hamilton losing this weekend.
Yeah, but I think you have to go into this as a must-win, though, instead. No, I think it's the opposite.
I'm okay. I mean, to me, it makes sense. To me, it makes sense to rule everybody who's even close. Because you're going to need everybody after this week. Anyways, that's just a thought.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but the next 3 weeks after that are Winnipeg, Saskatchewan.
Exactly. You need everybody, so you don't want to have somebody get tweaked in this game and then be out for 3 weeks. When, like, really, who cares if you beat BC? If you lose, you've already gotten a pretty sweet start with your two division opponents starting off 0-2. You already have some breathing room, through no work of your own, but just the way things have broken, the Argos are in a pretty good place in the division, to be honest.
I just don't like the idea of, because if you lose this one, there's a good chance that this turns into a 3 or 4 game losing streak, and that's not something you want to weather.
Well, not if everybody comes back next week ready to rock.
Yeah, I know, but just the way things have gone for the Argos, I don't know if that happens. In terms of just finishing up this injury report, the good news that we've got from it, a couple guys are coming back. So, like I mentioned, it's great that Jamal Peters is back there practicing. I hope he can play, because if he can play at corner, I think that does change things this week. And we'll get to this later when we get into fantasy advice. But your fantasy picks are going to have a lot in this game to do with some of these Argos and whether or not they're injured. Guys we're talking about like Andrew Harris, guys we're talking about like BC receivers. If Jamal Peters plays, that's very different than if you've got Holden out there at corner. And if a couple of these guys in the secondary are out, then you might want to load up on BC. But we'll talk to that more in our fantasy segment. But yeah, this has to be monitored this week, not just from an Argos perspective and a Argos fan perspective, but a fantasy perspective too. You know what time it is, JB? It's time for OCDC. If you're new to the show, our OCDC segment is JB giving you defensive coordinator strategies for both teams and me giving you offensive coordinator strategies for both teams. We will start off with the home British Columbia Lions. So, JB, you are the defensive coordinator for the BC Lions. You're defending Macbeth and the vaunted Toronto Argonauts field goal attack. What are you doing this week against Toronto?
I think that you keep the middle of the field packed, take away the seams, take away the in-cuts. You give Toronto those wide open swing passes to the wide side of the field. I think you allow those, because where are those going? They're not going anywhere. And those passes are such high risk. I know like that Macbeth has got a great arm, but if you just catch a gust of wind, or if you just 5% not enough, those are sixes. So that's what I'm looking like from a passing point of view. I'm keeping the middle packed, because I don't want him to start throwing in the seams and in the middle of the field where I feel he really excels. From a run point of view, I'm just waiting on Harris to go out. If he plays, where are we going to get out of him? A quarter and a half. I think that you feel pretty confident that you're not going to get 4 quarters of Andrew Harris from a run stoppage point of view. So I think, and from a pass rush point of view, again, you can speed Macbeth up into making bad decisions. It is one of his flaws. He can be great when he's locked in, but you can get him frustrated. You can get him trying to do too much. And when you start chasing him, he tries to do too much, and he is not a good, Zach Collaros, he is not.
Offensively for the BC Lions, I've kind of got two strategies for this. I think it's going to be really tough to run the ball the way that BC ran against Edmonton. Toronto's got a very different defensive makeup. Running the ball against Edmonton, it was some of those plays were like there was just nobody there. I don't know quite what happened. But
it looked like high school games where one team is just so much better than the other. They're running these sort of like counter plays for 75 yards. You're like, oh, okay, well that's a good play.
I know, and with the TV angle, it's so weird because you kind of expect another guy to show up at some point defensively. Like they run a counter play, and you're like, okay, well the linebacker will come into the picture in a second. Like, nope. Okay, well the safety should show up in a second. No, there's nobody there.
It was staggering.
So it's not going to look like that against Toronto, and I think in fact middle run is a really bad plan. They had a lot of success running up the middle, breaking through plays. Butler, a couple of his long runs came on just really simple middle runs where guys just got beat, and then one broken tackle, and that's it. There was so much space. I don't think I would make that part of the plan. The Argos, not only are they good at that, they will have been watching film on that all week. They're looking for that. I think you want to try and get outside, and ideally, if Shane Ray plays, and he's another guy that hasn't practiced yet this week, but if he plays, you want to stay away from his side because his speed is elite, but he's one of the guys dealing with a hamstring injury. If he's not in there, then I think you can attack both sides pretty aggressively. And so as BC, I would actually look to run some counters off of Butler, faking Butler to the left, having a jet coming across to the right, vice versa. But I do think you want to attack the outsides, and I think you want to force the corners, who are already going to be under a tremendous amount of pressure, to get involved.
I think just to kind of jump in, well, I'll save it. I'll save it till I'm DCing.
So I think that's my main strategy. Now, passing wise, I would get floods and I would get Rourke on the move. So I wanted to. You don't see a ton of bootlegs in the CFL, but I wouldn't mind some of that. A little play action, hard bootleg out wide. I really like flood concepts. Toronto's defense struggled, especially on the boundary side last week. Once Caleb Holden got in at corner, he and Shaq Richardson had what looked like a few communication issues, especially with regards to zone coverage. So that's where I want to get my floods. I want to really test them, test their discipline, and I think there may be some busts there. Now, if Jamal Peters plays, I still think you test it because you're still wanting to see, he didn't play last week. He's been dealing with a knee injury. What is his level of health like? So I still think you run with that same strategy. So flood the boundary side especially, but run floods to both sides. Get Rourke out of the pocket. Get him on the move. If you can change the launch point too, that makes it more difficult on the veteran middle, where Toronto's strength really is. The linebackers are obviously a real strength, but there's strength that from Shaq to Amos across the top. Both halfbacks, the safety, both linebackers, you want to stay away from that middle of the field. So everything's got to be outside if I'm the BC OC. All right, JB, we've flipped to the good guys. You're the Toronto DC. What do you do?
Yeah, that is a great question. British Columbia obviously looked pretty good in their 59-15 win. I think a couple kind of standard things. I mean, number one, James Butler is obviously the focus. You have to be all over him. You have to be rerouting him. You've got to be pushing him off his spot. You cannot have free releases. Screenplays, he should never be alone on a screenplay. There should be somebody on him pushing him off his route on every snap of the ball. You simply have to take him away. You just cannot let him be the focus. And so I think you're looking to do that hands-on Butler on every play. That counter stuff, don't, I guess, be aware of counter. I think the Toronto Argonauts defensive line and linebackers are a little more solid on that. So that's just standard run defense. I didn't see anything that exotic that BC was doing. But I think, you got to watch the screenplay. You got to watch the quick swing out passes. You can't just give it to Butler and just allow it and then let him be in space. I think you have to rough him up and you have to make him a focal point. From a quarterback point of view, look, Rourke's trying to become a Canadian icon. If he throws 90% completion every game, he certainly will be. A lot of three-step drops for him there. He's getting rid of the ball quickly, so I think that, from a defensive point of view, you're probably not looking the pass rush as much as you are hands up in lanes and taking away those quick slants and taking away those quick passes, and forcing him to progress in his reads a little more downfield. And Whitehead is a heck of a player, and he's going to get his catches. But I really feel like if you take Butler out of the game, Lucky Whitehead is not going to single-handedly destroy you. He's not going to score 6 touchdowns. Like, he might score 2. Fine. We're looking for a shootout here. So for me, I'm taking care of Butler. I'm getting hands up in the passing lanes, and seeing what BC can do with that in terms of forcing Rourke to make some plays downfield. Probably play a lot of man. If you're moving corners in and out and moving guys around to new positions, as much as you want to, God, it's so hard to play zone when guys haven't repped it. Zone is just so challenging even when you rep it, because it's so hard to know what the other guy's going to do and where's my zone begin and who am I going to pick up. And it's such a field defense. And I know as a coordinator, you don't want to stay in man the whole game, but I don't know. I do think the Argos are going to have to play a lot of man because, when guys aren't necessarily repped in a certain position, then it's just got to be, I got this cat, you got that cat.
If they're gonna play, like the way I see it, like I don't know if I like the idea of playing man all game, but their zone coverage was so rough
it's
last
just so
week.
hard.
I know
you just
there's
can't.
Too many new
you got
pieces.
Guys who haven't communicated. They've never played halfback before. I mean, it's just you just don't have the luxury of doing it. In my opinion, I think you're going to have to play not all man, but I think you're going to have to play a lot of man. And I think that's fine with Whitehead. I think that's you put a little safety over the top, and everything else Rourke wants to get rid of quickly. I think man works out okay against him.
Yeah, I wouldn't run any zero, but I would as long as we're comfortable with Mechie sort of strolling a little bit to Whitehead's side. I just don't want those 70-yard bombs to Whitehead. It's so tough to keep up with him. He's so fast. But if they can cheat a little bit to his side, I think that's okay. Not that you want to leave Burnham on his own, but it's you got to kind of pick your poison, I guess, a little bit. I think the keys, like you said before, like pressure. If they can get pressure on Rourke, that's a very different ask for a young quarterback. He looked great. Yeah. Like when he had no pressure.
It's tough, which the Elks provided. When you look at that Edmonton game, those 3-step drops, you're just not going to get there. I don't know how much pressure, unless you're getting pressure up the middle. I'm not sure how much the pressure game is going to work with him. I think you're looking to take away those lanes.
Yeah, three-step is tough, but I still think you can disrupt. You're not necessarily getting sacks on 3-step and fire, but you can still get some push up the middle. And I do think that the Toronto defensive line is way better than the Elks defensive line. They did nothing. Rourke was basically just playing 7-on-7.
Might be a nice Oakman game, actually.
Yeah, he could be a real key to this game. I think if you're looking at a defensive key, I think Oakman really disrupting up the middle could be a difference maker.
And those, he is a large individual to try and throw around.
Yeah, no kidding. I know when he gets his hands up, it's tough. He does disrupt. All right, offensive side of the ball. My plan against the Lions, I'm kind of excited about a couple of things. I think there's a really nice matchup to the field side for the Argos. Now, I know I might end up having to eat my words after this. I think the Argos can pick on TJ Lee. I know he's been an all-star. He's been a great player in the CFL for a long time. He's playing boundary half. He doesn't look like the same TJ Lee to me. I know he had a pick last week, but it was on a very poorly thrown ball. It was actually a ball that shouldn't have been thrown at all. He got beat on it, and he got beat a number of times, and Arbuckle just couldn't find his receiver. I don't know if it's just that TJ Lee lost a step. I don't know if he had help, and just with the TV angle, I can't see that. But to me, I think just in watching the TV coverage, I think there's a possibility there. And then if you look at the fact that you got Tyneil Cooper beside him, a young player at field corner, who I think is vulnerable. And if you've got a situation where you're forcing a slightly, on the wrong side of 30, TJ Lee and a young corner, and you've got Curly Gittens Jr. on that side, Ambles on that side, potentially Banks, depending on what happens this week. And I do think that's a possibility. Knowing that Banks doesn't really like the X spot, I wouldn't be surprised to see Devaris Daniels go back to X, and maybe they try Cam Phillips with an extra week of reps, or what's probably more likely is AJ Richardson at W, and maybe he plays there, and then you've got Banks, Ambles, and Gittens Jr. If they're on the field side, I really like those matchups with Lee and Cooper. So I'm going to target them as much as I can. The other thing that I think you can do is run. I think this has to be a run game. I really wish Andrew Harris weren't banged up, because this BC defensive line, they're slow. They're banged up as well. I think there's opportunities there. I like power middle against this defensive line because of how banged up they are. They've got some players that should be able to stand up the middle, but they really didn't that well. Edmonton didn't run that much because they got down so early, but Wilder found room in middle run, and they're more banged up this week than they were in week one. So I do think there's some opportunities up the middle, but I really want to see Coach Dinwiddie take advantage of what he set up so well last week. So all the things that you and IJB were talking about that we wanted to see in the second half of last week, we've got to now see them in this week's game, because we didn't see them in the second half. So that's play action off of Harris. This is misdirection off of Harris. Jet counters that I talked about as being a strategy for the BC offense. Get the defense going one way. I think you can take the edge. I don't love the contain of BC. I think that, both the guys they got on the edge, it's not like they're huge guys. They both, weigh in about 250, but they're not the fastest guys in the world. You can beat them to the outside. You can break contain as long as it's quick. And so that's a mix of that. Power runs up the middle, counters to the outside. And then when you do pass, I think we're really looking field side to take advantage of Lee and Cooper. So that's my plan for OCDC. One thing. Did our one things come through last week? Mine did not. I wanted an early score, and we threw an interception on that first drive. Your one thing last week, you wanted a punt return touchdown?
Touchdown? No, just a punt return over 20 yards. Okay,
well, the return game was unquestionably better than it has been. So I think, you kind of got a little bit of what you were asking for in one thing. Where are you going this week?
I will not accept that. This week, I'm just going to keep recycling my wishes until they come true. This week, I'm putting it on the O. I want to see a red zone touchdown.
You'd think that wouldn't be too much to ask, but yeah.
I want a red zone touchdown. Let's go. Come on, let's get this figured out.
If your one thing doesn't come true, then the Argos don't win this game. You're not going to beat BC without the ability to score a red zone touchdown.
I think it's a bounce back game for the offense. I think that, they are, they're not the weak sister of the team. They are, we have great players on offense. They did not show it versus Montreal. And I think they're ready for a bounce back. I'm looking for them to go out there and show that they are one of the top 4 teams in the CFL.
My one thing is I want to see somebody step up that no one is expecting to step up. And it can be offense, it can be defense. At the end of this game, I want CFL fans across the league saying, well, who the heck is this guy? And there are a number of candidates here. It could be, maybe it's Cam Phillips, maybe it's Richardson, maybe it's Adeboboye, maybe it's Priester, Holden. There's so many different players that it could be. one of them needs to have the game of their life this week. The Argos are banged up. They're down. They're going into a tough place to play on the other side of the country, a place where they lost 55-8 last time we traveled there. And they're going to need more than just the effort that they got last week and the mediocre results that we saw on both sides of the ball. It has to be better. And so someone that isn't a star has to become a star this week. That's my one thing. Predictions are tough for this one. I don't know. Do you want me to go first, how I see this game going?
I believe I went first last week.
All right, I'll start it off. I think this is a BC win. I don't want it to be. I would love very much for the Argos to win this. I think it's a really big game. I think the Argos winning this goes a long way to them winning the East this year. Because like you said in our last segment, there's a really good chance Hamilton loses, a really good chance Montreal loses. This is an opportunity to make ground, to be 2-0 against the rest of the division that hasn't won a single game is really an advantage early on. It's just an 18-game season. You think about baseball and being 2 games up with 2 weeks remaining. That's a big difference. It's hard to catch up. And that's basically the scenario that we're in right now. So to me, it's a big game. I don't think it's the right situation. And what crushes me is if the Argos were healthy, BC is absolutely ripe for picking because they to go on a bye week after the start they had is death. You can bet every coach absolutely hated the mentality around the BC Lions practice these last 2 weeks because it's been nothing but positivity. The whole country is talking about how dominant you were, how great your team is. Everyone's talking about how amazing the offense was, how amazing the defense was, and they've done nothing but take this in for the last 2 weeks. You love playing teams like this. Unfortunately, the Argos are just not in the right position to take advantage of it, and the areas in which they're hurting most happen to coincide with BC's strengths. So I just think it's going to be a really tough game on the defensive backfield for Toronto. I don't think they've shown the ability to put up the kind of points they're going to need to put up. I don't think they get to 30. So I think Toronto ends up losing a pretty tight one. 30-26 is my final.
I agree that it is surprisingly a huge game. I think they're going to be dialed in for it. I think the coaching staff, as much as I talked about maybe they punt on this, I think the desire to put a dagger in your opponents, to go 2-0 with your opponents potentially being 0-3, I think is really attractive, this early in the season. I think they have enough offense to get it done. And I'm really looking forward to the offense, showing them what it is, that it is capable of winning games. And so I've got the Argos winning 30-27.
I hope you're right. I don't feel good I still feel good about that stadium after the last time. I've still got this sort of shell shock when I think about
it's going to be
how poorly that went.
I agree. It's going to be tough, but man, what an opportunity to have an opportunity like this put before you.
I know. And the coaches know it too. You can see it at practice. Like they get the urgency of this, and the veteran players get it too.
And they'll
so
know
many guys banged
come
up.
Saturday.
I know they're the last game too, like the opportunity, but I'm worried that takes the pressure off. Like if those teams do lose, does that alleviate some of that pressure? And you're like,
I think it amps it up. If they lose, you're like, here we go. Like this, essentially, you would have to lose 6 in a row to lose that. You would basically just have to go 500 the rest of the season to clinch the East, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with your math. I think that makes sense. All right, we'll see. I hope you're right, and I so rarely hope you're right. Let's do some fantasy advice, JB, and we're in the win column. We absolutely destroyed the Argos fan cast this past week. We got our credibility back after a really rough debut where we scored under 50 points. We crushed it.
That was a terrible opening gambit, but it was nice. Look, it felt like beating Ottawa, but you can only play the teams that they put in front of you.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get a more worthy opponent this week, but that's that's how it goes. We just got to play who they give us, and sorry, Fancast, but we'll look forward to the rematch. This week we take on Canadian Football Countdown, so I expect a little bit more competitive battle. So. We've got some tough calls this week. I don't know if we can lock in our fantasy lineup because we're going to have to wait to see some injury news later in the week. But what we will give you is some value and some positional areas that we think you should maybe look to when you kind of analyze these 4 matchups that we've got this week. So stuff that we like. In terms of quarterback, I don't think you'll find any better value than Bo Levi Mitchell at 8,600. Like you're looking, the top of the quarterback market is 11,900. So you're almost talking 12,000 for Cody Fajardo. I would absolutely stay away from Cody Fajardo. He loses his center this week. I think Montreal is actually going to win that game, and I'll go through why when we get to our picks and predictions. But at the very least, it's going to be tight. Losing your center as a quarterback is a much bigger deal than I think a lot of people realize. And other than that, if you're looking for value, it's not terrible value with Trevor Harris. In the quarterback spot, 9,100. I think if I weren't playing Bo Levi Mitchell, I think that's probably where I would go, for that one. I think there are a lot of people that are going to be on Nathan Rourke, and I know we talked about the banged up secondary for Toronto. I'm not sure, given that if you can get Nathan Rourke and Trevor Harris for like the same price, or Bo Levi Mitchell for the same price, then I don't know. And he's $900 more expensive than those guys, or $1,000 more.
Rourke, as a Canadian quarterback, puts up 2 games in a row like that, do they build him a statue?
You start thinking about it, like it's an amazing thing. And
when was the last time a Canadian quarterback, was a potential MVP of the league? I mean, if he were to put up another big game against the Argos, I mean, that would make him one of the best 2 quarterbacks in the league.
And from that standpoint, I hope that happens. I hate to see it happen against the Argos. I would love Nathan Rourke to be a star, but it's one game into his big season. And I think that for him to be priced in fantasy as the sort of second highest eligible quarterback, they've got Vernon Adams ahead of him, who will not be playing this week. But I just don't think, I think it's just too big a risk. And while I like him and I think his numbers will be good, I think your money is better spend $800 less on Trevor Harris, or spend $1,500 less on Bo Levi Mitchell. That's better value. For running backs, if you want to go high end, I would stay away from Andrew Harris this week. I just don't think you're going to get a full game from him. I'd also stay away from James Butler. Those are the top 2 guys on the board, Butler and Harris. I would stay away from those guys. The next 3 guys are all banged up. Stanbeck, Kadeem Carey, Don Jackson. I would stay away from them too. I think there is a lot of value in some of those next tier guys. I think James Wilder is actually an interesting play at 6,400 this week. But I still love the Bombers guys. I think Brady Oliveira 5,266. I really like Johnny Augustine. Maybe this is the week he has his breakout game. 4,300. There's really nice value there. And if you're going a lot less with like 2 of those running backs, it means you can splurge a bit with receivers. And there's some really nice receiver matchups this week. So yeah, I kind of like spending less on running backs in this week's. And you could even get like Jeshurun Antwi, starting running back for Montreal, and he's 4,600. You can get like 3 different running back starters for averaging like 5,500 a player. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you and I debated. We'll see how it goes. Like I'm of the mind that I like Oliveira. I think that's a nice value pick still. But for running back 2, I just punted. I'd be like, give me the guy holding the Gatorade thing, for 1,000. I wouldn't spend any money on RB2. Yeah, I just don't think there's any value there, even at 4,000. Like, for what? The bunch of random guys going to put up 35 yards. So I'd rather save that money for receivers.
I think the problem is, like in our league, you're not allowed to leave any position blank. And so with our setup, the minimum you can spend is 2,500.
No, it's true.
There's
I'd
no
love to go lower.
Than that.
I'd love to go lower. But I go 2,500 for me. RB2, 2,500. flex.
The problem is you can't find anyone that's even playing. Like I think the best, if you're going really cheap for 3,500, that's about as low as you can get, because even like Javon Leake is 3,500, he might get
I
a couple
understand.
carries.
I just don't think there's any difference between the guy who might play little and the guy who doesn't play at all. I just don't. I'm like, give me, an Argos fullback over. I just, for me, that's probably the way I'd play it. Like, look, we don't have to. We'll see how it plays out, but that would be my strategy. I wouldn't bother with anything at RB2 because I just don't think there's any value there, even at a lowered rate, because those guys are not anything, in my opinion.
See, I think, and I disagree with that, because I think if you go, like Joshua Antwi had a pretty bad game last week, but I don't see that happening again. I don't see Montreal being unable to run the ball a couple of weeks in a row. And so I do think there's good value in him and he's only, he's like $2,000 more than a guy that won't even play, and he's the starting running back. And, Jamal Morrow, I like Brady Oliveira, we talked about. But if you're really looking for a value guy, I think Adebayoye might be a sneaky one, because 3,500 for a guy that may end up, we don't know how it will work out, but depending on Harris, he may get the majority of the snaps. Or if we find out come Thursday, if Harris can't go, now they probably make that position American, and now you start looking at Javon Leake and you start looking at AJ Ouellette, and now suddenly you've got some real value. AJ Ouellette, 2,500, something like that. Or I'm not even sure he'll be healthy though.
I like Ouellette too, if he's a go.
Yeah, that's the thing. So you got to see how that works out, and there's going to be a lot of those game time decisions this week. Now for defense, let's do receivers first. This is where I do think you load up. I like the BC receivers. I think Lucky Whitehead. I think you're going to get numbers from him. I don't know if he's going to have a monster day, but I think you're looking at 100 yards, and I think there's a pretty good likelihood of a touchdown. And I think that's pretty good value at any cost. He's 8,800. Which isn't through the roof. We've seen receivers a lot higher than that. So I like him as a play. I think strategy-wise this week, I wouldn't mind loading up on the Montreal skill guys. I actually expect them to do fairly well against Saskatchewan this week, with fewer question marks this week at quarterback. They know Harris is going to be the guy. It's not going to be a positional battle this week. They're not looking to the bench to see if someone else is coming in. So I do like the Montreal guys. I like pretty much any BC receiver. I think they could all have decent days, but I think Lucky Whitehead is where I would focus. Anyone in particular stand out to you receiver wise?
Well, I always love me some Kenny Lawler. I know you're going to pay. Retail for him, but I like Kenny Lawler. I like Shaq Evans again. I still think there's value there. I like the Winnipeg receivers. I'm all for paying good money for those two receivers, because I feel like if you get two good receivers and a quarterback, then I think you're pretty set, because like, who's going to beat you with running backs? I don't think so. I think that's enough to take the week.
Yeah, and if you're looking for value plays at receiver, I think you look to the Argos dress list again. I think you can find some points in Cam Phillips, or if AJ Richardson ends up playing W, you'll get those guys for 2,500. And they're going to get some yardage, they're going to get some balls thrown their way, and for a minimum price, that's not a bad gamble. But otherwise, I think your strategy, you want to focus in on Saskatchewan's always a good place to focus for receiver. Montreal and
I love
BC.
I love me some Greg Ellingson. I think he's. He's going to be 7 catches and 85 yards all day. And
even the Edmonton guys have some value, but I want to stay away from Edmonton for now. And transitioning into our defensive pick, I like the Calgary Stampeders defense this week at 3,244. I think you keep going against Edmonton until they show you they're not going to throw interceptions and fumble the football. I think that's just a smart play until they prove otherwise. They're getting better. They've gotten certainly better than week one, that disaster of a week. But Calgary at home against Edmonton, that's always a pretty intense game. I think the Stampeders are going to make it pretty tough on the Elks, and the Elks make it tough on themselves to begin with. So I like Calgary D. But I could see you going, Hamilton, Winnipeg defense. Both I think are good plays this week. If you were ever going to play the Montreal defense, this week might be the week to do it because Saskatchewan's banged up and we know the problems they're going to have on the offensive line. But I think there are better options there. In terms of other places to go for fantasy, I say stay away from Hamilton, Winnipeg. I wouldn't take a single player from Hamilton or Winnipeg except for the value running backs that we've got listed as, with Oliver and Augustine. Otherwise, I think that's going to be a low scoring, intense football game that it's not going to produce a lot of fantasy points. So I'd stay clear there. But there's opportunities everywhere else. So that is our fantasy advice for this week.
Yeah, and I love that that we were able to get some value out of picking Ticats, and then at the last minute they wet their pants, and it was kind of the best of both worlds.
It was the best. We had Dane Evans last week, who had a great first half, did everything that we needed him to do fantasy wise, and they still lost the game. It was the best of both worlds.
Yeah, way to go, Hamilton.
Let's get to our picks for this week. So you are up on me by one game. We were 3-1 last we've had just some bad beats. My Ottawa pick in week 1 was a bad beat, and then last week we both missed on Hamilton. We were 3-1 otherwise. I still can't believe Hamilton threw that game away.
Way tougher this week.
Yeah. So let's start it off. Saskatchewan at Montreal. You're up first. Who do you like?
Yeah, look, I'm gonna back Saskatchewan because they've been my horse. Montreal at home, as any Argo fan knows, is a problem. Montreal also, like we've talked about, they know like an 0-3 hole. Regardless of what the Argos do, like an 0-3 hole is not easy to get out of. Like you end up having to go, sort of 12-3 the rest of the way, so you're really digging yourself a hole there. But I think Saskatchewan can get it done in that game. So until proven otherwise, I'm going to roll with Saskatchewan, but that's going to be a really interesting game because Montreal really needs it. But I do also wonder, like, if more COVID stuff pops up.
Yeah, that is a concern. I think there's probably a few teams worried a little bit about that after the first week. But yeah, we know that Vernon Adams is out. He has COVID, and you have to wonder how much that's going to spread and
not to get
how
too
it's going
deep
to
into
affect
this,
people.
Certainly you and I have talked a lot about it on here, but the league, I think, it'll be very interesting to see what the NFL does. But you have to think the league is going to try and institute some more protocols if this starts to become an issue where teams are losing 4 or 5 starters.
Yeah, if that's what happens. Now, I don't know if that's going to be what happens. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, if you do start losing 4 and 5 starters every week, then they probably will step in with some more protocols. But I don't, we're early. There hasn't been like an outbreak yet that we know about. So I think we're sort of, I don't see anything going in reverse here unless it's pretty drastic. So I wouldn't anticipate that happening. Saskatchewan, Montreal, for me, this is a Montreal win. I think if there's ever a time for Montreal to win a game, it's got to be this week. They're in desperation mode. They can't go 0-3. They are a better team than their record right now. They really should have pulled that off last week. They probably should have pulled it off in week 1. Montreal could very easily be 2-0. They need this win, and I think they're going to get it. So Montreal for me. Hamilton at Winnipeg. I'll go first on this one. I think Winnipeg. I think they kind of own Hamilton psychologically, but I also think they're the better football team. I think they're a tough team to beat at home. They're not going to be sleeping on Hamilton the way that they were sleeping on Ottawa in their home opener. So I think Winnipeg wins this one.
Yeah, this is a really hard one because it's always so hard at the beginning, especially when the team plays another team twice. We don't really know what Ottawa is. Is Ottawa like a plucky little team that'll give you a fight, or is Ottawa garbage and Winnipeg really should be beating them by a lot more? I like Winnipeg at home. I already have showered after picking Hamilton last week, and will not be picking them again soon. So I like Winnipeg at home, but I am very curious. This is one of those power ranking crossover games.
The next one up is Edmonton at Calgary. You're up first for this. Do the Elks get their first and only win of the season?
No. The Elks looked better last week, but I say no to the Elks. I say no, sir. Calgary at home, I think, give the Elks a good hammering.
Yeah, I can't see, like, after we were duped into picking the Elks in week 1, I just don't feel like I'm going to pick them again until they prove me wrong. So I think Calgary's a better football team. They don't look great though. They're vulnerable, but it's in Calgary. This game is going to be fun to watch. I love Edmonton Calgary games are intense. So I'm looking forward to this one, but I think Calgary wins it. And we've already given you our Toronto BC predictions. I'm on BC. You're on Toronto, and that will just about wrap it up. Make sure you catch our post-game reaction podcast that will probably be out at about 4 a.m. on Saturday once everything wraps up. So I'm pretty excited about this one, JB. I know you're not excited about the game in the West Coast time zone. Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X and Argos podcast. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.